In this recording, I'm going to talk to you about how to create a new database in SQL Server 2012. And I'm also going to talk to you about the different files that are included in a SQL Server database and how you can add files if you wish. And I'm also going to talk about a little bit about database options. So first thing we're going to do is you'll notice that we've logged into SQL Server and I'm looking at the Object Explorer inside of SQL Server Management Studio. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new database, and you can see if I drill down on the databases folder, I can see all of the databases that are currently on this server. If I want to create a new SQL Server database, an empty database that is, that has no tables or has really no schema, I can right click and I can say new database. And so really what we're going to be doing is creating an empty container into which we can place tables and we can place functions and stored procedures and all kinds of different objects. Before we do that, we have to create the container. So when I right click and I tell Management Studio to create a new database, I get an interface that looks like this. My cursor is blinking at the top where it says database name, and this is where I can name my database, really anything I'd like, as long as I don't use spaces, and as long as I don't start the database name with special characters. I can name the database what I want. So I'm going to call this Karen Sample Database. The owner of the database, it says default right now, and what that means is the owner or the person who can do everything in this database, and including administrators or SAs of SQL Server, would be me because I'm currently logged in. And it happens that I'm an administrator of SQL Server. But the owner of the database is going to be assumed to be whoever is logged in and creating the database when this happens. We're going to be talking more about owners, ownership, and permissions a little bit later in the quarter. So for right now, I've given my database a name, Karen Sample Database. And you're going to notice down here in this grid that I have two files by default. I have a file whose internal SQL name is Karen Sample Database. Notice it's the same as the name of the database. And this first file is a file that is what we call the primary file group, and that means that its primary function is to hold data. The initial size of a SQL Server database is going to be the initial size of the model database that comes with SQL Server when you install it. SQL Server comes with 4 databases by default. One of them is called the model database, and it is, as its name implies, the model from which all other databases are created. It's 4 megabytes in size, and so every new database that gets created is going to be created at 4 megabytes. This next column where it says auto grow and maximum size is to allow you to tell SQL, when I filled up this 4 megabytes worth of data, what do you want me to do? If I click on this ellipsis, I can enable auto growth, which means that SQL will automatically grow and allocate more space for your database as it gets full. If you enable auto growth, and you don't have to, you can say that this database will be 4 megabytes, and once it gets to 4 megabytes, it's full and no one can add any more to it. But if I wish to enable auto growth, I want to make sure this is checked. And then I have a choice of whether I want to grow my database in a percentage or in megabytes. If I choose percentage, I can change this to whatever number I want. So I could say every time the database outgrows itself, grow it by 20% of the space that it is right now. So it will keep growing in 20% increments until I say down here either to a fixed size of 100 megabytes or grow it unlimited until we run out of disk space. So for this option, I'm going to go ahead and say in megabytes, and you'll notice the default is 1 megabyte, and I can change that to anything I want. So I'm going to say, go ahead and grow this main data file 2 megabytes at a time, unlimited. I'm going to say OK, and you can see in the column here that it does exactly what I asked it to do. Now when SQL Server creates a database, it doesn't just create that database and do it all with smoke and mirrors and magic. The data files for this database, this one in particular, the first one, has to be stored somewhere on your disk or maybe on some other disk. The default is that this main data file is going to be stored on this path, and you can see that it's kind of long. It's under Program Files, SQL Server, MS SQL 11, and then this is the name of my server since I have 2 instances of SQL Server on this machine. And under that directory, MS SQL, and then the data directory. And that's where the file is going to get stored that has my primary file group or primary data in it. I'm going to leave the file name blank because in a moment we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at the properties of this database and see what SQL automatically names that file if you don't give it a name. The second file that we have here is a log file, and the log file is called a transaction log, and its role is to store every insert, update, and delete that we make to this database in the primary data space. It doesn't really belong to what we call a file group. It starts out at an initial size, a default of 1 megabyte, and I can change that if I wish. And it also has the auto grow and max size options we saw a moment ago. The default directory for this file is going to be, you'll notice, the same as it was for my main data file, but I can change that if I want to by clicking this ellipsis. And in a second here I should get I get an error message, which I shouldn't have gotten. It says it can't access the path, but that's okay. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So we can actually put that file anywhere on this disk that we wish, or if I have external disks, I can put it where I want to. Then I'm going to leave this file name blank as well, and then let's create the database and then we'll see what SQL does with those file names. So I'm just going to go ahead and say OK right here at the bottom, and when I right click and refresh my databases folder, I can see that I have Karen's sample database here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to right click and go to Properties. And on the left hand side I'm going to choose Files. And you can see over here at the very last right hand column that it has named my 2 files, KarenSampleDatabase.mdf and KarenSampleDatabase_log.ldf. The 2 file extensions, MDF and LDF, have meaning in SQL Server. MDF stands for main data file, LDF stands for log data file. If I want to, I can click Add down here at the bottom, and I can continue to add more data files to this database with the same options I had for the other files. And I can change this path to any path I wish. And I'm going to say OK. I'm going to go back and right click and go to Properties and Files on the left hand side. And you can see that this data file that I just added, this extra data file, now has an extension of .ndf. So in this database I now have 3 files. I have a main data file, a log file, and an extra data file, and I can have as many of those extra data files as I wish. We're going to talk about options in the next video.